Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Ayush and I'm a chartered accountant. Let's start with today's video. In this video, we will take a look at India's growth story and understand why India's growth story is paradoxical. While there are numerous data points that we can study to understand the India's growth story, we will focus only on the most relevant aspects that provide a broader understanding of how the country is performing and where we are headed as a nation. But before diving into different data points, I believe the essence of India's growth story can be beautifully summarized in one line. Do you want to see what is that? Let's have a look. India's growth story is precarious. Both the optimists and the pessimists are disappointed. I think this is such a clever line to articulate the India's growth story. At first, this line might seem contradictory, right? Like, how can it happen that both the optimists and the pessimists are disappointed? At least one party should be happy. Turns out both parties have their own reasons. And mind you, those are valid reasons when you look at different data points. I think this is the beauty of our nation. India is such a unique country that it manages to disappoint both optimists who are invested in India, who are excited for India's future, and the pessimists who like to downplay our achievements and the progress done by India. But don't worry, we will take a look at both the sides and try to understand the situation in a more pragmatic way. First, let's uh, start by understanding why the skeptics or the pessimists are disappointed. To understand why the pessimists or the skeptics are disappointed, we need to understand the three main themes behind India's growth story. And these three main themes behind India's growth story defy their preconceived notions and expectations about India, which is also the reason for their disappointment, of course. So let's have a look. Many apprehensions that pessimists had about India's potential are being proved wrong by India's remarkable progress. Okay, so let's understand these three main themes behind India's progress and India's growth story. The first is economic resilience, impressive growth trajectory, and a promising future. So India's economy has consistently demonstrated a remarkable resilience in face of global challenges such as COVID-19 pandemic, 2008 global financial crisis, etc. It has not only endured these crises but have always bounced back stronger from each of these crises. So if you look at this graph, you can see that we there was a dip in our GDP growth rate at the time of global financial crisis, but we again bounced back. If you look at during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a negative growth, but again we bounced back even stronger. So this has been a continuous theme in India's growth story. So India continues to demonstrate an impressive upward trajectory, suggesting a promising future. Now let's understand this whole point with the help of numbers. The most obvious yet important number to look at is the GDP number. Currently, India's GDP is 3.7 trillion US dollars, which is expected to become 5.9 trillion US dollars by the year 2028. India currently is the fifth largest economy in the world, which is set to become the third largest economy by the year 2027 as per IMF. Right? India currently is the fastest growing major economy in the world and is expected to remain so till 2028. Okay. Now let's compare how other economies will perform during this period. And mind you, these are the real growth rates. Okay. So if you look at India, India is expected to grow at the rate of 6.3 to 7% during this period, whereas China is expected to grow at the rate of 4.1% and US at the rate of 2%. But one nuance that we have to keep in mind is that China's GDP is 5x of current India's GDP and US GDP is 8x of current India GDP. So these economies are more prone to face the large base effect problem, which is reflected in their growth rates. But anyway, we should celebrate our progress and we should just keep moving forward. Okay. The second main theme is significant improvement in ease of doing business through reforms. Okay. So in last decade, India has seen important structural reforms, okay, ranging from GST laws, insolvency and bankruptcy code, RERA Act for real estate sector, and abolishment of angel tax on startup investments. How it has had an impact? Let's have a look. So if you take a look at ease of doing business rankings, India was placed 133rd in the entire world in the year 2009, which it became 63rd by the year 2019. So we took a giant leap in terms of ease of doing business in India. Now let's understand how these laws have helped the businesses. So GST simplified the tax structure, enhanced compliance, and the most important part, created a unified national market for goods and services. Insolvency and bankruptcy code streamlined resolution of stressed assets, improving credit recovery, and boosting investor confidence. RERA Act brought transparency and accountability to the real estate sector, at the same time protecting home buyers. And this is important for startup ecosystem, which is abolishment of angel tax, which is funding without fear that their investment will be taxed as income. So imagine a law which used to tax the capital as a part of income, and you have to pay the tax on that. Although, so this was not inducive for startup ecosystem. It will also help early stage startups who will have better access to much needed capital without additional tax burden, and it will also becoming more attractive destination for global investors, VC, and private equity firms. So all these reforms are steps in the right direction, building trust among investors, leading to a healthier business environment, and of course contributing to India's growth story. Now, if you look at the third important theme behind India's growth story, it is its world-class digital public infrastructure. Now let's understand what does it mean, digital public infrastructure. So India's digital public infrastructure consists of digital Lego blocks across three different layers. The first is identity, supported by Aadhaar. Second is payments, supported by UPI. And the third is data exchange, supported by DigiLocker. Combined these, they enable online, paperless, cashless, privacy respecting digital access to variety of public and private services. Now let's understand the impact of DPI. So DPI has been leveraged both by the government and by the private sector. So government has leveraged this DPI by implementing a direct benefit transfer scheme, whereby it allows the government to distribute the subsidy directly into the accounts of the citizens, allowing the government to reach each citizen effectively and cheaply. Whereas startups have leveraged DPI to grow faster by onboarding new customers easily by eKYC, building large scale payment apps, etc. And it has also created new revenue opportunities. Now let's understand how different startups have leveraged DPI and have gained because of that. If you look at the startups like Zerodha, Grow, Slice, they have used a layer of DPI called Aadhaar by onboarding the customers faster by doing eKYC. There have been startups like Paytm, PhonePe, Google Pay who have built their consumer apps on the back of UPI, which is the second layer of DPI. Startups like Cred and Zerodha have used DigiLocker to access documents held for verification. So you can see it has a real impact on the startup ecosystem, this DPI. So let's understand with the help of case study of Zerodha. So for Zerodha, it took in the first 6 years, they got 60,000 customers. Okay. And after DPI, in the next 6 years, they got 1 crore customers. Okay. So you can imagine the phenomenal impact of DPI on startups like Zerodha. And this is a tweet by Nikhil Kamath where he's saying that it took 6 years to get to our first 60K customers, each of whom had to sign and courier 40 pages of forms and wait for days to get their accounts opened. Whereas the next 1 crore customers they got in the next 6 years, entirely eliminating paper in the process. This was enabled by eKYC, digital signature, and digital documents. So I think India is overcoming its problem of bureaucratic inefficiency by leveraging technology. Now India is set to export its DPI, also known as India Stack, to the entire world. Okay, to give you an example, UPI. UPI is currently the fifth largest payment network in the world, and it is already being used in countries like Nepal, Bhutan, Singapore, and UAE. So, yes, digital public infrastructure has been a phenomenal impact on the startup ecosystem. Just to cut this point, I would just like to say that India should continue to disappoint these pessimists with its remarkable progress and should redeem our trust with destiny. Let's move on to the next part of the video. Hi guys, so in section 1, we understood the three main themes behind India's growth story. Based on that, we can safely conclude that India is on the right track, performing well across various parameters such as economic growth, structural reforms, and governance. But if everything seems so promising, Why are even the optimists are disappointed? Don't you think we need to understand that? And let me tell you, optimists are the one who have invested in Indian companies, Indian startups. They are really excited for and hoping for India's progress. So they actually have skin in the game, as they see. So understanding their perspective is crucial for decoding the entire truth behind India's growth story. But I can tell you, before we get into detailed reasons, I can tell you the theme of their disappointment. Okay. As per them, India's progress has been good. Okay. But it is not good enough. Now let's understand if let's understand why do they think that. These are number one, moderate and inconsistent growth rate and mismatch with expectations. So, optimists drawn by India's demographic dividend economic reforms since 1991 expect a steady and high growth rate to unlock its true potential. Whereas in reality, India has delivered moderate and inconsistent growth rate, which dampens their enthusiasm. Okay, now let's see if this makes sense through data. So, this is a graph which talks about historical GDP growth rates of last 25 years. Guys, just have a look at this graph and tell me, are you able to see a consistent high growth rate in past 25 years? I cannot see that. I think yes, we have done quite well during some periods. For example, from the year 2003 to 2007, from the year 2011 to 2000 to FY16. But on an overall basis, I can see that there has been a lot of variation in our GDP growth rate. It is not consistent and not high. The growth rate has not been consistent and has not been high growth rate. So yes, the other point they have is that India there is an inability to bridge the gap with peers like China, which reinforces a perception that India underdelivers on its economic promises. So foreign investors always like to think India is like China because we are the population is same, both are old cultures, but let's see if we really have under-delivered on our economic promises. So this graph shows historical GDP growth rate of last 42 years. If you look at the first 30 years, okay, that is from 1980 till 2010, you can see that China has consistently grown at the rate of 10% during this period, whereas India has grown at the rate of 5.5 to 7% in 30 years. But if you look at the if you look at the average GDP growth rate of 42 years, China on average has grown at the rate of 9.09% and India has grown at the rate of 6.09%. So yes, China has done quite well in terms of GDP growth rate on a consistent basis, at the same time achieving higher growth rate. But one thing that we have to keep in mind when we look at these numbers is the there is a fundamental difference between China and India. China is not a democracy, it is an autocracy, whereas India is a democracy. The diversity in India and China are completely different. We are much diverse country than China. The political system, the people of the both countries are completely different, right? So yes, we have to keep this theme in mind when we compare these two countries GDP growth rates. But to conclude, I would just like to say that we should aim for higher growth rates on a consistent basis to unlock India's true potential. We should also aim for creating large scale employment opportunities to fully utilize India's human capital. Because if we don't do that, it would be impossible to enjoy the fruits of demographic dividend. And there is an also risk of India's population becoming old before getting rich. And we don't want that scenario. We want our country to prosper, right? Now let's move on to the second point. So this second reason for the disappointment of optimists is I have tried to summarize this in one funny one-liner, right? Billions in promise, but millions in reality. You might get idea, but let's see what it says. A significant portion of India's wealth is concentrated among small segment of population. This extreme concentration limits the purchasing power of majority, affecting domestic consumption and market expansion. Now let's understand this through data. If we look at if we look at the largest economies in the world, yes, we are the fifth largest economy in the world. We are also set to become the third largest economy by the year 2027. But this is not the entire picture. The devil is always in the details, as they see. If you look at the GDP per capita number, we are 140th in the entire world, We are even behind countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia. So yes, we have a reason to celebrate our progress, but at the same time, we should see the data in details like GDP per capita, etc. Then there is this graph which talks about who pays India's income tax. So this is quite widely talked about data, but let me quantify it. So there are about 142 crore people in India. Out of those 142 crore people, 74 million, that is 7.4 crore people, that is about 5% of Indians file their tax. Okay. Then out of these 7.4 crore people, 22 million, that is 2.2 crore people, pay some amount of income tax. Okay, that is only 1.5% of Indians pay their taxes or have such income that they need to pay their tax. Whereas the same number in China is 10% and in USA it is 43%. Out of these 2.2 crore people, 4.5 million people pay 80% of the India's income tax. So you can imagine 45 lakh people contributing to the 80% of total income tax collection in a country of 142 crore people. Just see the numbers, 45 lakhs versus 142 crore people. So yes, it is true that there is an extreme wealth concentration among small segment of population, which is hampering our domestic consumption. And why I'm focusing on domestic consumption, let's understand that. Private final consumption expenditure, PFCE, as a percentage of GDP is around 61%. Now, you might be confused. What does this PFCE mean? So, PFCE is quite simple. PFCE means total value of goods and services consumed by resident households. Okay. So, this figure of 61% means, let's say if our GDP is rupees 100, then out of these rupees 100, rupees 61 are contributed by household consumption done by people like you and me, the general public. Okay, so if 61% of GDP is dependent on the consumption done by people like you and me, domestic consumption, you can imagine how much of India's economy is reliant on consumer spending and domestic consumption. So, like, just as a joke, I can say that if you are a true patriot, you should consume in a correct, in a dil khol ke manner. Okay, so yeah, I would just like to summarize this whole consumption debate with this flowchart. So we should focus on expanding our consumer base in terms of numbers, empower the people with greater income so that they can do discretionary spending. That will boost our domestic consumption, which is the largest component of GDP in India. Around 60% of the India's GDP is driven by domestic consumption. Yes. So then only we can increase our GDP number and boost the economy. So I would just like to quantify who are consuming in India. So there are different agencies is different numbers. But if you look at, but on an average, I can see that if you're earning 12 lakhs per annum or more, you are among the top 10% income earners in India. So there are only 12 to 15.6 crore people in India who are doing the most of the value added consumption. They are the one who are driving the consumption. They are the one who are doing the discretionary spending and contribute to the domestic consumption in a meaningful way. And we have understood how much a domestic consumption is important for India's GDP. Yes, I can see that optimists also have some reason to be disappointed with India's growth story because, as we just saw, we have not grown at on a consistent high rate, and also the people that can contribute to the consumption are very less. So, as they say, the investors have been promised billions of people who can be the consumers, but if you really look at the numbers, there are only million people who can do the consumption. So, yes, they also have some reason to be disappointed. But I would just like to conclude this whole debate of pessimist versus optimist with one quote. This quote is by the founder of GitHub, Nat Friedman. I think this is a good investing philosophy and maybe good philosophy for life as well. He says that pessimists sound smart, optimists make money. So I think choice should be very clear. You have to choose if you just want to sound smart or if you want to have skin in the game and make some money. So I hope this video was helpful for you to understand both sides of India's growth story. Right. Thank you for listening to the video. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day. Bye bye.